Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. It's brilliant. I can see you all beginning to join us. My name is Fania Stoney, and I'm a consultant here with Great Place to Work, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. As usual, if you can see our screen, if you can hear me, you might pop onto the chat and just let me know that you're with us today, and that it's all working on your end as well. I wish I was here in Mayo saying, gosh, what a beautiful July, warm, sunny July day ahead of the bank holiday weekend. Unfortunately, that is not the case this morning. I've actually had to come downstairs from the office upstairs because the rain on the Velux was so loud. It was causing kind of background noise on the webinar. So let's hope it picks up for the weekend. Who have got here? That's brilliant, Katrina. Good morning. Great to be able to see you here. That's great that you guys can hear us. So welcome to the next installment of our Trust Insight series. The focus on this series has been to bring you insight from kind of a broad range of industries on a range of different topics. And today we're delighted to have Liz Graham from Central Bank and Jim taking us through the session. One of the key focuses for us in this new series has really been the demonstration of community, both from the organisations sharing their experience, but also us learning from each other. And I would encourage anybody to kind of to get in touch with ourselves or with Liz afterwards and really kind of to build on that learning and to build that sense of community as we all try and kind of make our way through the current situation that we find ourselves in. Like I said, we're welcoming back Jim Flynn, who's going to be taking us through the session today. I know it'll disappoint some of you, but he is not in his car today. He is actually in a building. So sorry to those who are waiting to see the interior of the car again. So just a little bit of housekeeping. The session will be wrapped up within the hour. The slides and the recordings will be available afterwards. We'll get them all out to you. And we do encourage your participation and your questions throughout today's session. So please do keep those coming. We'll have kind of time to look at those and to get them answered. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jim Flynn. So Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fania, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Really excited about the opportunity to talk to Liz both about her own experience and the experience of the Central Bank, who've been a client of ours since 2016. And who I personally have really enjoyed working with and continue to enjoy working with. So today we're going to look at a couple of questions, and I suppose I've posed some questions which we're going to seek to address over the course of the next hour, which is, first of all, I want to introduce Liz and say, give a little bit about her background. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the Central Bank in terms of who they are and what they do, how important they are. And then I suppose we want to go straight into what might be of value to you in taking part today. So why should you listen? So Central Bank being who they are, we hear a lot about them, but they seem so different and so unique. And I suppose one of the questions that I imagine some of you think is, well, how can I relate to the experience and the people experience in terms of the Central Bank of Ireland? It's interesting, but what challenges have they faced? What kind of diversity is there? And one of the things that I think across the range of experience, certainly in the time that Liz has been there, nearly most of the type of people challenges that we all face in organizations have cropped up in one way or another through the Central Bank. So it's both a public sector organization and it's part of a much bigger organization in some ways. In some ways, it's almost like a multinational with an Irish office, and yet it's got the challenges of the public sector. It's got a huge range of roles from, we'd all guess, I suppose, economists and regulators and supervisors and accountants, but you've got lawyers, you've got actually fitters, electricians, all sorts of roles that go across the Central Bank. So there's huge complexity and diversity there. They've gone through a huge level of cultural change, everything from, a very well flagged move of office to going to twice and a half the size that they were, from about 700 people to around about 2,000. They have big learning and development piece. They have unionized background, so some of the challenges that come with that. Um, and they're very much in the public eye. So all the, many of the challenges we come across, they have addressed over a period of time, and it'd be just really interesting to hear their learning and their experience about that. So in that, Liz is going to go into, what has worked well, how they have set out on the Great Place to Work journey, what else has been going on, and then on a very practical way, look at what's been actionable, what could you think about bringing into your own organization, and what will this mean for the future of work. So towards the end of the webinar, we're going to look at, given where everybody is now, what kind of things might I apply as we look forward, and what insight can we bring here this morning in terms of that. So as I say, I'm really excited about it, and I'm very thankful to both the Central Bank and especially to Liz for taking the time to spend with us today. I know that Liz is certainly extremely modest, and she's one of those people who I suppose quite undersells the level of insight and wisdom that she brings to her role and the passion that she brings to her role. So it's a privilege to have her on, and I'm very thankful for that. So Liz, you started off in journalism, I understand, and what happened after that?
So if you can believe it, and first of all, good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for signing up for today. And I really hope I can live up to even 50% of what Jim has said there. I hope you get something out of today, and I hope I get to cover all those topics that you're seeing on the screen now. I think to give you a little bit of background, as Jim said, I did my degree in journalism. I took a year out after my leaving cert, and I was going to be, the next big thing in terms of an investigative reporter. Fast forward 4 years, and I realized very quickly that wasn't for me. So I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to be when I grew up at that point. So going back to being about 21, 22 years of age, and an opportunity came up to join the bank as a summer intern. And I was in one of the economic departments of all places, kind of more in an admin role. So fast forward 16 odd years later, and after my summer internship, I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to stay on, and I moved into human resources, again by accident rather than design, but a very happy accident, you could say. So I'm still in HR some 16 years later. I have built my career here, and I suppose in many ways I've grown up here. I've been, if I look back over the last 16 years within HR, I've worked across most disciplines in some way, shape, or form, from recruitment into HR business partnering, into employee relations, a tiny bit of exposure to L&D in my earlier days, and a real focus on employee engagement for the last 2 years or so. So I've certainly learned my craft across a range of disciplines, and I'm very proud to call myself a HR generalist in that sense. But look at the bank in that 16 years, we've lived through a lot of change. It's not the same place I joined in 2004. It has quite rightly had to change, had to evolve, had to change. And I guess me as a HR professional with that, we had to respond and react to the challenges that came with that. I think for myself, I like to think I know the organisation quite well, but equally it knows me quite well as well. And it indeed has been very good to me. It's given me great opportunity. I've worked with, become friends with some really great people who work in a range of different roles, both in the bank and outside of the bank at this point. And very importantly, I even found myself a husband here, which was always the main goal in joining the public sector from Donegal. And that's an interesting fact. No one ever believes that I'm from Donegal. I have one of those accents that nobody can ever replace. I think probably like most people online today, I've been working from home since March, and it's going to be a long time, or at least a couple of months, before I'm back into our really fantastic work office on North Wall Quay, and I really miss it. I really miss the social element. I'm one of those people who annoys you by just landing in front of you, wanting to have a bit of a chat and talk through something. So I really had to adapt to doing that in a virtual way. Since March, I've very much focused on pandemic response. It's more or less been the exclusive part of my role. And I would have to say, notwithstanding it is not a good situation. It has been possibly one of the greatest career experiences I've had. very, very, very rewarding, and really an opportunity to really make a very practical and tangible difference for people. But equally, it has not been without challenge. We've been working in much very, very, very quick turnarounds. I mean, you don't have time to think about things too much. You really have to act and apply your judgment very, very quickly. I think the challenge was somewhat heightened by having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old running around my feet underneath me, and also with my husband who also works in the bank, also trying to work from home. So again, like many people across the bank, across Ireland, had that challenge of childcare. I was fortunate to escape homeschooling because my kids are of an age where, you know, colouring in and a little bit arts and crafts and playing kind of does them. But I was a very happy woman on the 29th of June when my creche reopened, and it's been a bit of a game changer from a work perspective since, and great for the kids. So I think that's kind of my story in the bank, and maybe we can get into a little bit more about what the bank does, because I know it can be a bit of a mystery, and we're one of those places where it might feel like it's a bit more mysterious than it is. But hopefully through today you'll see that we're facing a lot of the same challenges from a people perspective, and trying to do a lot of the same things that a lot of people around the table here today are doing as well.
Absolutely, and that's, I think that's a really important message here, is how much of those challenges are common across organizations, and what we can learn from. So Liz, the central bank has a very proud history. It started 77 years ago, and you know, it started, the first governor of central bank was actually from Bandon. He's a proud Corkman. He was, I understand, the...
Oh no, here we go.
I did not sign up for this.
So he was an advisor. He was the economic advisor actually to the signatories of the treaty, and he eventually became governor of the central bank, and from Bandon. So he got off to a very good start, I have to say.
It really set us on the path, I'd say.
I mean, that was inspirational. And then when you joined, you were in this building with this interior, not that currency, but certainly in this building where the executive leadership were at the top of the building, and
Yes.
a very different environment than the one that you've transformed into right now. So that, you know, the central bank has gone through a whole series of changes over that period of time, and is absolutely transformed, both in terms of function, both in terms of how it operates. And like, you'd have to say 10 years ago, when we headed into the last crisis, people were worried about having money in the ATMs. But you have had such an impact over the past number of years that you're now in a position to, I suppose, to really support the country in terms of things like price stability and so on, which we're going to touch upon. But your vision is to be a fulfilling, to be respected by your peers, to be trusted by the public. So that word of trust is very much there, central to your vision, and to be a fulfilling workplace for your people. And that's something that we're going to get into, but that's written very much into your strategy, and very much into what you want to have happen. The mandate of the central bank, and please, Liz, where I get this wrong, correct me, but my understanding is that principally central banks support price stability. So this idea that inflation really kills an economy and drives unemployment and so on and so forth. So primarily about bringing price stability through a series of things, to financial stability, which we can see the importance of that when in some ways the central bank was a little bit of a killjoy over the past couple of years, saying we need to be prudent and we need to be careful with things like mortgages and building capital buffers and so on and so forth. And now we're probably not explicitly, but quite thankful that they're there. That in the event that the resolution piece is that in the event that some financial institution, like what happened with Anglo, has to be wound down, that there's an orderly way of doing that, and that different financial companies are regulated, and that there's control around that. That our payments sort of go through, and when I go to use my credit card, or when I go to draw down on my pension or my insurance or whatever, that those things actually happen. And then to give us some insight in terms of economic analysis and statistics, which gives an indication what way the economy is going and how it is organizations and governments can make investments and can consider the future. So it's a really, really significant part of everybody's lives. When I reach for my wallet, the money that's in my wallet, the credit cards that are there, you guys have such an impact in relation to all of that. Your overall mandate is hugely important to everybody's life in the country.
It is, and I think that's, I mean, it is what makes us unique. What we do has such an impact, and something you mightn't, you take it, you wouldn't even realize. And I think, with the full range of that mandate, what I'd really stress there, and what's really, really important to us, is that serving the public interest. So we're serving the public interest, by safeguarding monetary and financial stability, and making sure the financial system is operating in a way it should to support the wider economy and indeed consumers. But all of that it just boils down to, the public good, serving the public interest. And for us, how we deliver on that mandate, it has to reflect that. I think that public interest, it's one of the primary drivers why people choose to join the bank, why they choose to build a career there. And I mean, we're talking a lot about the mandate there, but obviously I've the benefit of a lot of experience in the bank as well. But maybe to speak of some of the big changes that I've seen in that bank at times. So obviously, we've lived through a financial crisis back in 2007, 2008, and that wasn't an easy time. We had to learn from it. We had to change. We had to rebuild the trust and the confidence in terms of what we do. That wasn't an especially easy time to be part of the central bank. I've always been proud to work there, but at that time there was always a certain stigma attached to saying, "Oh, I work at the central bank," especially if you're in a taxi. You can imagine what sort of reaction you would get. But over that time, since that time, I mean, we've taken a lot of different steps, particularly to try and prevent the impact of a similar financial crisis. We've seen a lot of change in our structure and in our leadership, and that's really supported our evolution over the last 15 years or so. I think one of the key call-outs for me is probably around our openness and how we engage and communicate with our stakeholders, and how that has evolved from when I started to now, to right up to today. So I'd say traditionally, you normally wouldn't know who the governor of the central bank was, except you, Jim, obviously, with the ties to core. But it wouldn't necessarily be a household name. But the appointment of somebody like Patrick Moynihan back in 2009, 2010, that changed that a little bit. It brought a very different approach, particularly in terms of that openness. And I think that is something that he'd be very much associated with. And I think he built a lot of trust as a result of that transparency, that openness, and just his whole style and approach. And again, this is carried through the successive governors since. If I look at Gabriel Makhlouf, our current governor, who started last September, massive focus for him, particularly in his first 100 days, was that focus on external stakeholders. He spent a lot of time on the road going around Ireland, trying to get to know the people, trying to get to know who we were serving and how we could do that better. So I have to say that's definitely one of the most welcome changes that I would have seen. It was a very different style, and obviously had an impact on culture as well. We're now at a point where we're in a public health crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetime, thankfully, and I would hope to God we don't see again. It's brought with it an economic shock that's been completely unprecedented in scale and certainly in speed. And some of the steps and measures that we've taken over the last 10 years as we emerge from that financial crisis has helped build the resilience around that, particularly in these earlier stages of the crisis. So we look back over the last few months at some of the practical actions that the organisation has taken to support households, to support businesses, to support the economy. So in terms of cutting the amount of capital Irish banks have to hold so they can continue to lend to customers throughout this crisis. There's a role in Europe. We're working very closely with our partners to agree policies to support the whole euro area economy, and working to ensure that lenders apply payment breaks consistently and help protect consumers who might be experiencing that short-term financial difficulty during COVID-19. So we're very much in the midst of that right now, and we have a very important role to play. As we move into our recovery, and that's kind of forecast really 2021, 22, that we'll have a key role in terms of supporting that recovery as well. So, I mean, to be able to talk about what we do feeding into some of that, it is a massive source of pride for all of us, and we can really see the impact, I suppose, in terms of what we do, and hence why it's so important that we always put the public at the heart of what we do.
And your results very much reflect that idea of public sector service and the pride that goes with that. And you can see that very much across all of your results, you know, over the period of time. It is a huge leverage point, and you've managed to leverage that further over the past period.
Yeah, we have, and maybe to speak a little bit about our journey with your good selves, Jim. So, you know us very well at this stage, almost probably better than we know ourselves. But we started our journey about 2.5 years ago, so it was the back end of 2017, and I've been lucky enough to be part of that since. I want to be very, very clear, very upfront. We might have started the journey in 2017, but we're still on that journey. We haven't reached the accreditation standard at this point. So, you know, it might not have been, I suppose that accreditation, it wasn't necessarily our primary driver back whenever we signed up in 2017. We'd come through a lot of change at that point. We'd moved to our new building, which had a huge impact, a really positive impact on our culture and on our ways of working. And what we wanted was a trusted, a recognized mechanism that we could really assess the employee experience. We could measure employee engagement and understand where our folks needed to be and what we needed to build on. And obviously accreditation was seen as something that we could achieve, but not necessarily our primary driver. But having said that, that's, you know, we still would like to get there. We still see it as the standard we should be striving towards, the standard that we can reach. So we are continuing on that journey. I think particularly some of the stuff I'll talk about later in the session, many people would say that your response to the crisis, you know, it is what can make you stand apart, what can make a difference for your people. So we would be hopeful that we've made up some ground, I think, over the last few months. I think we have made a positive difference for our people, and we've made inroads, I think, in terms of some of the gaps we previously experienced. But, you know, we'll just have to see. We just need to keep doing what we're doing and building on that. I think for me today, especially, and I know this was referenced at the start, this is a great opportunity. This isn't something I would normally get involved in. This is my first time doing a session like this in the virtual world, so I appreciate your patience. But for me today as well, it was a great opportunity to reach into the Great Place to our community. Yes, we can share some of our experiences, but it'd be great to build some connections and learn from you as well, particularly as we're moving out of pandemic in the next few months, and we're trying to take the very best of the last 5 or 6 months and make that a permanent, a practical reality into the future. So great opportunity for us today.
Thanks very much, Liz, and we'll look forward to building on those connections. We are very proud of that community and the willingness to share, and thank you for that. One of the things in terms of the new governor spent the first 100 days listening, both internally and externally, and you've carried on that sort of focus on trust and listening into this particular challenge. Talk to me about that.
So in terms of listening, if we look external, it's really, you know, do people understand what we do, or we, you know, how we work and the impact that we have. And I think that has led to a bit of a change in terms of how we're communicating, particularly over the last year. And we have, you know, animated series of videos trying to break down the myths of what we do, what we, you know, how we make a difference, all the different angles of our mandate and our role, and even the type of information we have out there for consumers. We have some really great stuff accompanied with videos and FAQ documents, etc., particularly during this crisis. We look at it from an internal perspective. The listening channels, I suppose traditionally you'd often think your survey, your annual survey, that's how you listen, that's where you get feedback. What we've been doing, particularly over the last year, is trying to build that listening strategy, expand those listening channels, so we have that always on sense, that we kind of have a good sense of what's going on. So I think if I look back at January and February, my objectives for this year were very much aligned to that. And then March happened and a pandemic was announced, and notwithstanding all the challenge that brought, but it probably forced an acceleration in terms of some of that listening and how we were doing that and how we were acting on it. So maybe if I can take you through some different elements of our response, you'll see some of that in practical terms. So I might rewind back to the first quarter, and before the world changed completely from under us. So COVID-19, or coronavirus, as we're probably referring to it more frequently then, it was bubbling up. We were reading about it, hearing about it a lot on the news, and maybe the full impact of it in terms of becoming a global pandemic was certainly on its way, but perhaps not everyone had a full appreciation of that. In the bank, we stood up our instant response team in January. It's really looking at our business continuity. How do we ensure our critical functions in the range of scenarios that could arise in terms of how it could have progressed at that point, and also putting a focus on, well, how do we support our people? How do we give them what they need in the different scenarios that could arise? If we look back then, we introduced our home working policy back in the middle of 2018, and it allowed for people to work from home for 1 day per week. And we had about 10% of the organisation who were availing of that. So while we had the facility, we all had our laptops, certainly it was an accepted practice. It was embedded to some extent. We certainly didn't have the processes in place, the policy in place to support full-scale home working, which was becoming a more likely scenario. So if we look at the first case being reported at the end of February and into the start of March, that also brought with school closure. We were seeing what was happening at a global level was starting to really pick up pace. You're seeing what's happening in Italy, perhaps at a European level. And this brought it home to people a lot of what the impact this could have. This could potentially have on them as people. And it brought a healthy level of uncertainty for them. So I think, as part of our early response, it was trying to give some clarity and some comfort around home working. So listening to what are the concerns here? What are the situations people are concerned they may find themselves in, or they're now finding themselves in, particularly things like potential school closure. So it's trying to work out all those scenarios and literally list them out and say, okay, in this situation, this is what's going to happen. From your perspective, if your school closes, if your creche closes, you will have the facility to work from home. You will have this flexibility, and you will be looked after to the greatest extent we can. We had people who may have identified in a high risk category who were very concerned at having to use public transport to get into the office, and this was pre-pandemic being announced, and trying to work with them. Okay, well, what's the right thing to do here? How can we support you? What's the best thing we can do in terms of supporting your particular condition? And that might have involved getting some advice from our ROC health providers as well. So really, by the start of March, we were able to map out a lot of those scenarios and give people a lot of comfort on that. And that it went down very well. As you can imagine, it was a very personal situation to think, what am I going to do if X, Y, and Z happens? And what if I have to self-isolate? What? So we were able to give a lot of comfort there, that basically people wouldn't be negatively impacted through no fault of their own. Basically, that we'd be as flexible as we could to support those. So that was a very fortunate aspect, I suppose, for us, that we were able to do that at a very early stage.
I remember being in with you in February when you were, and you were working on some of the normal stuff and also doing this scenario planning and the contingency planning. And I remember wondering to myself, is this a bit of an overreaction? Because I noticed a whole load of very senior people scurrying around and working very, very hard in terms of going through, several scenarios. Because you've got such a range of roles and such a range of contingency to think about, that you were well ahead there in terms of preparing for both business continuity and supporting a whole range of possible scenarios, some of which played out and some of which really didn't. So that was.
It was, and I'm going to talk a lot about scenarios today, because it's really been bread and butter in terms of getting that practical understanding. But I think that given our role that we play, not just in terms of we are an employer, we're an organisation, we have a massive role to play externally. So we've no choice. We always have to be prepared in that sense. So hence you would have seen a lot happening back in January and February. And I remember, and I think about it often and kind of smile very uncomfortably. Somebody saying, I don't know, were they making a bit too much fuss of this? I mean, this is just low key. This is just happening behind us. Kind of, you're like, I don't know, this feels different. And then a couple of days later, we had our first case in Ireland. So, I think it just goes to show that, yes, we were very much in planning mode, but there was still that level of uncertainty. People didn't really know where it was going. But certainly, I remember having you in some of those days, Jim, probably to talk about our survey and maybe all this happening alongside that. So it was an interesting time. I spoke there a lot about being able to give some of that clarity to people around just what would happen in the different scenarios. particularly in terms of flexing to increase our home working capability. So all that was happening. Then there was also a very personal impact here. We're an organization of 2,000 people. It was somewhat inevitable that at least a proportion of that population would be impacted more directly by COVID-19 itself, maybe by potential exposure, whatever that might be. And again, at that point in time, we didn't know an awful lot about COVID-19. Public health advice was out there. There was really trying to build very, very strong awareness there. But people were a little uncertain and a little anxious around that as well. So we decided within our HR advisory team, well, I think we need to offer more practical support here. So we established a dedicated phone line where people who may have been concerned about being exposed, may have symptoms, may have just come back from travel, had to self-isolate, whatever it might have been, that they could ring in. And it's not that we were giving medical advice, but we were just making sure that we're doing the right thing. So have you contacted your GP? Are you aware of the advice around this? So maybe just setting them on the right path and trying to give them a little bit of assurance at that point. I think how we evolved that then, yes, it was very much established, and that minority that were impacted were very happy to link in with us and to get that support. As we expanded it a little bit, recognizing for some people who might have to self-isolate and be away from family and friends and whatever it might be, it wasn't exactly an easy time. So we had a little check-in as part of our approach. So every 2 days or so you'd get a phone call. And I remember as we were rolling this out and after we designed it, I kind of managed some of those initial instances or cases myself. And I remember making the first phone call where it's like, why are you ringing me? I'm fine. And I think that there was a slight wariness of, am I just getting the phone call now to check I'm working or check I'm not working, whatever it might be. And I think they were a little bit surprised that you're really just ringing just to, how are you? Have you got what you need? Is there any more support you need from our side? And I'm going to ring you again now on Friday, and just to check in. Here's my number. You ring me if you need anything, whatever it might be. And so you actually formed a bit of a rapport, a bit of a relationship with the person. And I think if you look at where we were in March in particular, there were some people who might have been referred for testing who were waiting weeks for results, and indeed they were over the symptoms before they would have perhaps gotten a negative test. So they were very, very uncertain. So over the course of a couple of weeks, they had someone that was checking in with them, just keeping an eye, particularly pushing any other supports we might have been able to give, particularly around employee assistance program, for instance. And I think a number of people might have seen that fairly small thing, but it's one of the things I'll be most proud of, because just the reaction from people, they really genuinely appreciated that approach, and were a little surprised by it, because again, a lot of people would have had friends, families who maybe weren't experiencing that with their own employer. Maybe they weren't experiencing the same sort of support. So I would definitely say it was one of the stronger features of our response. We still have that phone line. Sorry, Jim.
So you call that approach caring and clarity. Is that right?
Yeah, we that was really more around care. So the care and clarity, which is obviously the real focus of today's session, that is a direct quote from our governor, from Gabriel McClue. So very early in the crisis, he said, in this crisis, he said, that is what we want for our people. We want them to feel valued, to feel that they matter, that we care about them. But we also want them to have clarity in terms of what to expect from us, but equally clarity in terms of what's expected of those. So everything that we've done has been anchored to that theme, and particularly in some of what we've been doing in my world in HR and engagement, has been reinforcing that message of care. And then through some of our leaders, our people managers, that clarity being absolutely critical as well. Maybe moving to our leaders and people managers population, if that's okay, Jim. We were again back to scenarios. We were able to provide a lot of clarity for people at an early stage, and we were able to show that care in very practical terms. But while we were able to do all that, there was a lot of uncertainty for our people managers, for our top leadership there, the divisional, our functional leaders, because they were going to be fronting into situations that they'd never experienced before. It was entering into a pandemic, people potentially being ill, being unavailable for work, whatever it might have been, and they certainly needed a little bit of reassurance. We have a lot of policies in place to support our people leaders, but trying to interpret what they're not built for this situation. So again, very early, and thankfully before we broke to work from home more broadly, we again mapped out all those scenarios and put the people manager lens on them. And we were able, over, I think it was the course of 2 days, to run workshops in the different divisions across the bank of going, these are the type of situations you're going to encounter. This is what you can do. This is what you should be thinking about in all of those situations. And again, it was very practical. It was turned around very, very quickly. We weren't exactly sure how it was going to land, but the sense of relief, I think, within that room, that we thought of all these different situations, we had answers in all these different situations. They felt kind of equipped and had that comfort to go and to support their teams, to manage them, to manage the different situations that could arise, and be comfortable that, you know, we're having a good, consistent approach. People are having a consistently positive experience around some of these matters across the organisation. So I'd say that was very important and something we needed to continue. So if I look at that leadership there again, and I'm talking kind of our top 130, 140 who would manage different functions and divisions in the bank, keeping that channel open over the last 5 or 6 months on a very regular basis has been very, very important. You know, we have our HR business partners who are very, very frontline in terms of providing some of that support. It was important to us as well to bring that community together as regularly as we could. So we have our leadership network community come together every 2 weeks. And that is the opportunity. Gabriel will share a lot of what's happening on the external front, how our strategy is evolving, how we're adapting, how we're showing flexibility in that, the impact we're having, what to expect over the next couple of weeks. But equally, if you look at our different listening channels as well, pulling together, well, what are the pressure points? What are the things that are working well, or the things you need a little bit more support on over the last week or two? And bringing that into that room to have a discussion on it, to give a little bit of guidance, share experience. That's been really, really, really valuable for us. And I think we're now at a point where the comfort is much greater. I think what I would say is, while we certainly gave assurance and a little bit of guidance to that population, what shone through, and I think what shone through even in terms of some of our survey responses, that people first approach. We wanted to take a people first approach in terms of the internal response to this. It really was shining through. It wasn't just being said at the top. Everyone's motives in that room with our leaders, they very much wanted to do the very best for the people. They were really mindful of the additional pressures people were under, what they could do to alleviate that, and how can I provide as much flexibility as possible. So they were really, really the most positive intent and really trying to make that difference for the people in any way they could. And I think that shone through bringing that community together, just to see that common purpose at the leadership level there as well. I think that was really, really welcomed.
Okay, so to recap on the story so far, the practical steps that you've taken this year is you started out this year with a focus on listening to the employee and to a greater degree and hearing the employee voice. And that has sort of been a key focus. In that, then, as we were getting into all of this, you did a series of scenario planning and looking at the different implications of different impact and different things that could possibly happen, and thinking about how you could support people. You went from that into communicating that to people, to give people comfort, to say, yes, we've looked at this scenario, we've looked at that scenario, we've looked at this scenario, and these are the kinds of things that can happen. Then you put a call line in place so that people, according as they were starting to come across stuff on the ground, they came back to you and they could raise queries and they could feel support by you. And then you proactively went out and actively listened by calling people and asking them, how are you getting on? How can we support you? Which has clearly gone down very, very, very well. And then in the background of all of that, you were looking at how you can support leaders and managers to respond to those different scenarios. So you had a series of workshops and supporting those 130 or 40 of the leadership network to respond to stuff on the ground and be closer to people. So it's quite a lot, and that kind of takes us up to, I think, where you ran the first pulse survey and looking at what was going on there.
Yes, so we were probably at the start of April at this point. We were 4 or 5 weeks into a completely very rapid evolution into a new way of working, expanded home working. So obviously we felt we'd done a lot of the right stuff, But we needed a practical measurement in terms of, well, how has that landed? How has that impacted the experience? How are people feeling about what we're doing? What can we do better? So we decided to go with the pulse with your good selves again, Jim. So we sent out that pulse. I can't say our expectations were particularly high. If anything, we saw it more as an opportunity to understand, okay, well, how can we keep building? What can we do differently? But what we saw in that was quite a noticeable shift. There was very much a huge trust in our response. Felt that people felt informed. They felt they were clear on what to expect and what was expected of them. They felt that that their well-being was at the center of what we're doing, and they agreed that we were taking a people-first approach. And what was, I have to say, probably the question that really stood out was they felt trusted. They felt trusted to get on with their job and supported to do that. So that was a fantastic message to get. And while we knew we had done, we hadn't done too bad, we probably weren't expecting to see such an impact. I think even looking at the comments within the survey, again, normally we get pretty direct feedback in those, and they're always useful to understand some of the themes coming through that. The tone here was very different. It was really, really constructive. A lot of people really just expressing satisfaction, expressing gratitude for how the first couple of weeks had gone. So it was a real validation, I guess, in terms of what we had done. Given we'd had our previous surveys, certainly wouldn't have given it as positive an indication. We certainly didn't see this as any excuse or reason to become complacent. If anything, seeing that was a real G up. We really got even a bigger appetite to keep going and look at new ways to support our people. So, for instance, in that first survey, well, certainly the experience was really positive. People were probably still struggling at that early stage, settling into home working, to feeling as effective working from home as they might have done in the office. So that was an area we really drilled into. And again, practical enough solutions around that was certainly looking at, well, what equipment can we provide from the office that might make it a little bit easier, monitors, etc. Our L&D team were rolling out sessions since on managing remotely, just to give people a little bit more comfort, especially if they're leading a team and the different challenges that they'd face. We took some of those type of actions. Our approach to comms, we just kept going as we were doing. We had started giving a daily update from Jerry Quinn as our COO that went out initially every day to people, just giving them the lie of the land. This is what's happening now. This is how things have evolved or not evolved. And even when there wasn't an awful lot to say, still getting that very current picture out to people. So over that first few weeks, making sure people had all that information and transitioning out. So we built a lot of trust. We built a lot of patience in terms of being very honest about where we were then. So we just continued that on from April up to now. We don't have to communicate quite as frequently, but the content, what we're communicating, hasn't changed. We're still giving very, very up to date, very open, very honest assessments in terms of what's going on. I think we were coming from that survey in April very positive, very, very happy with it, and a lot of opportunity to keep building. And we were coming into May at that point, and this is probably the point where I suspected maybe things would start taking a different path. So we were still in lockdown in May, as we all know. But the questions were starting to arise. Well, what does a return to the office look like? When is that going to happen? Should that happen? How will we feel safe going back to the office? And what probably seems a little bit common sense now in terms of what that's not going to be happening for a while. At that point, there was still a lot of uncertainty, and bear in mind, even at this point, we're still looking at plans for the leaving cert at a national level. And just went out very upfront and said, look, it's going to be another 6 months at the very least before we can reopen our office. Only essential staff really, or those with a really, really pressing need to attend, could go back on site. So really, realistically, we're looking at November before you're going to see any major change. And I suppose at that point, for some people, that was a relief. They felt, yes, you're looking ahead, you're planning, you know what the story is. For others, it was, oh, I have to keep working like this for another 6 months. It wasn't necessarily an easy message to land. And I think if we hadn't taken the approach to comms earlier, that message might have wouldn't have landed quite as well as it did. Because notwithstanding, it wasn't necessarily what people wanted to hear. they believed it, they understood the rationale behind it, they understood the thinking that went in it and the motivation behind it. So what could have maybe have been an opportunity where things could have started to step back, it probably, the openness and honesty again, it had brought us a lot of respect and trust in terms of our messaging. So we move a little bit further on, so we're coming into June. We had a very limited return to the office. We have possibly about 5% maybe of staff, particularly supporting critical functions. So we kind of worked through that process. We'd identified people who had a very pressing need to come back to the office for whatever reason. Perhaps they didn't have an appropriate home working setup, or key aspects of the role had to be completed on site. So we go through that process again, engage with our people, ask them to let us know what their needs were so we could assess them. So we did a very positive engagement around that. Gotten through that return at the end of June. We've taken numerous measures on site in terms of ensuring safety. We shared all that experience with everybody. We got to get an opportune time to go out again and see how people are feeling, what they think, and how has our response evolved as we're moving into a longer term situation. Again, I think a lot of the cynics, myself included, expected, okay, in April, we did very well. And perhaps at that point in time, there was still an element of, we're in the first few weeks, we're still in the honeymoon period, and people were very happy with that initial response. So again, possibly didn't expect that it was going to plummet, but thought we'd probably be a little bit lower than we had in April. And very surprised to see that we'd actually, not only had we maintained it, but we'd actually built on some of the key questions. So questions around trust, questions around our response and people first. They were creeping from 80 something percent into 90%. And that was I have to say, it has just been fantastic. This was, I think we did that survey maybe 3 weeks ago. And even that particular focus area I mentioned in terms of trying to help people feel more effective working from home, I think we jumped up nearly 20% on that. And it was just a real validation for us in the pandemic response team in terms of, yes, we did focus on this, but more importantly, people are actually feeling the benefit of it now. And again, what we did has made a positive difference. So I think that was somewhat unexpected for me. As I said, I probably expected we might drop down a little bit. If anything, we saw we made some further gains and closed the gaps on some of the key areas. For people working on site, it opened the door in terms of maybe engaging with that very small population to see, well, what else can we do on site? And we had a great session with that group earlier this week in terms of just going through different things, their ideas, their suggestions, and again, just being able to show, thanks for that, we're going to do that now. So you said we listened, very simple response that we can give. So I think that survey has opened the doors for other ways of engaging. Again, I mentioned the comments in terms of the first survey and the very positive tone of those. So within this, what was very, very resounding was people are now at a point where they kind of have comfort that we're not going to be rushing into a big return to the office. They've comfort, we're taking the right steps. They've a lot of comfort and flexibility that's open to them, and the fact that we're still very effective as an organisation.
Before we get into the future of work,
yes.
which I'd like to get into, I suppose. So just recapping a couple of things that you mentioned there. So certainly the leadership piece has been really important in terms of setting up this idea of caring and clarity, and then turning that into practical steps and turning that in, using a strong sort of communications approach to both listen and then respond, and being seen to you said, we listened, this is what we did. I mean, some people would say that you've moved into possibly one of the most beautiful buildings in the country. You've got unlimited resources. You're dealing in billions every day. How can that possibly mean for haven't you got everything at your fingertips? I mean, it's certainly my favorite building in go into the middle of it, and given that you've got all of these resources at your fingertips, isn't that easier for you than it is for somebody else?
I wish I could say it was, Jim, but unfortunately I can't. And I mean, we've spoken about it, our new building, and yes, I mean it is a fantastic building, and like I said, it has had such a positive influence and impact on our culture and how we've worked. So yes, of course, we do have a great resource in our physical workspace. We don't have that right now because 95% of our people are at home. I used to hear quite a lot, and over the years, well, don't use print money, you can do what you want. Now, not saying we actually stopped printing money last year officially, but I can assure you the practical reality doesn't quite live up to that idea that we have, unlimited resources or great access to do what we want in that way. And I think a lot of what I've spoken about today kind of demonstrates that it's the practical things that we've done are the things that have made the most impact. So I've spoken a lot about serving public interest, and that being that purpose, that opportunity to make a difference being so core to what we do. But being part of a public sector, while it brings a lot of opportunity, it brings a lot of benefit, it also brings certain restraints. So we operate within those constraints around pay, around budget. And yes, we do generate a profit, but we lodge that back to the exchequer. That is not our money in that sense. So it's a very, very important for us that how we spend, what we do with the money we generate, doesn't impact on the return that we're giving back to Ireland, essentially. And we always put that lens on in terms of what we're doing. I think in my experience, I've never operated with a big budget, particularly around engagement. And I can't say I've ever seen that as a great challenge. And if I look at it and some of the stuff I've talked about today, what we've achieved has been down to our actions, simple actions, the leadership behaviours, the commitment that's been shown there, and simple practical measures. We haven't had to invest money in a lot of that. We've had to invest time and thought and commitment to leadership. That has been where the bigger investment has been. And like I said, based on our experience over our last two surveys, we've seen benefit of that. So I guess the message is no, or we don't have unlimited resources. I wish we had sometimes, but that hasn't been an impediment for us. There are things you can do without those type of resources, and I think a lot of what I've talked about today should reflect that.
Okay, and Liz, given all of that, and given the your focus on listening and responding and seeing what's going on, crystal ball gaze for me, to tell me how, what's the future going to look like now from your point of view?
So the future for us, if I look back again, not to go back to the survey, but it kind of gives a little bit of an insight into the future. So we had overwhelming feedback that people wanted to see some of the flexibility, the access to home working, things like that, to continue into the longer term. And there's no question, and again, I think everyone around this virtual table will agree, COVID-19, this pandemic, it's changed how we work right now and over the last couple of months. We've seen a complete acceleration and societal shifts in terms of flexible working. And even within the public sector, one of the commitments is to go for a 20% target on home working. So what we need to do, our focus for the future, is really looking back at that last 5 or 6 months. What have we learned? How can we take the very best of that and apply it into the future? And how do we make sure that the trust and engagement we've built continues, and it hasn't just been in response to a particular point in time? So that is going to be a key thing. I think around that interest and that opportunity and that shift in terms of flexible working, that is going to be a pretty immediate focus for us over the next couple of months, particularly around homework. And we're set up for it now. So how does it become a bigger part? How do we give people that flexibility and show that trust in them? So we're moving now into a consultation process. We can really understand, well, what does flexible working look like for us? It isn't just a case of, it's not just home working, and it's not a case of just introducing everything and this is what it is and let's do it and go for it and see how we get on. We want to build a shared understanding of what does flexible working look like in practice for us. Have a really meaningful engagement with our people to hear their insights, hear their voice. What would actually work for us as an organisation? What can, at a practical level again, and what will actually make a difference for our people? And what do we need to do? How do we make it sustainable? So that would be a key people focus for probably the next 3 to 4 months, and really getting that engagement right and understand what other employers are doing here and what's best fit for us. It isn't just about bringing in best practice, but it's best fit practice for us as well. And that's kind of how my role will transition a little bit, is supporting some of that activity over the next couple of months. So I think the future is, I can go back to the question that is even asked in the survey. It's, what have we learned in the last few months? It's taking that and applying it into the future. That would be a big focus. And I think maybe learning from the experience of others within this community would be very helpful for for us in that, as well as I'm sure we're not alone in trying to expand, particularly that focus on flexible working over the next couple of months.
So I mean, following through on that theme of humility, you're interested in learning from other organizations as well, and willing to share that learning with other organizations in a community of practice type way.
Yeah, I mean, I think as an employer, flexible working has always been a feature, but not nearly to the extent that it could be. And I would imagine that a lot of people around the virtual table today are probably in the same boat, or have introduced practices, seen them work, seen them not work, seen the practical implications. So that's where we are now, is trying to understand all that. So if we can get some insight from people in a similar position, or maybe even a little bit more advanced in their thinking, that would be great. And please feel free to reach out after this session. It'd be great to hear from you.
Liz, I just want to thank you so much in terms of your insight and your willingness to share, you know, in terms of those sort of practical steps, and that it doesn't stop here today. That it's part of the community, that you're willing to continue to share, and inviting people to, I suppose, to look at that insight and to continue to do that, which is just really, it's very humbling to see. It's both, I mean, it's wonderful from a public sector point of view and public service point of view, but also in terms of supporting the country, and really in terms of your impact, it's really impressive, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you very much, Jim. I hope everyone got at least something out of the session today, and if I can fill in any blanks, please reach out. But thank you so much to Jim, to Fania, to the whole team, to Colin, to Marina, just for setting up today. I hope I have delivered on the objectives. But I hope I'm leaving something with everybody. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
You have and more, and this is the start of many conversations, is also the way I look at it. So this is opening up the conversation for people to pick up on various threads that they've come across over the course of the morning. And I want to thank all the Great Place to Work team, Fanny and Marina in particular, and also thanks to everybody who participated today and who came on the call. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Liz. Just so you know, the kind of messages are coming in from people, and one in particular, Liz, I think is worth sharing with you now. Somebody saying that you're a great ambassador for the process, but also for the central bank as a whole, and they're lucky to have you. So thanks so much for all that you shared and all of that with us today. Final piece from me is just to say our next webinar is going to be on August 13th. We're going to be looking at learning and development on that webinar, so hope to see some of you there. Like to wish everybody a very nice bank holiday weekend, and thank you to Jim and Liz for your time today. So that's great. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.